You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on AngryMarks.com with Peter H. and Stevie J. Find them on Twitter at HardcoreCDN and at AngryMarks. And now, for all the news, reviews, and interviews in mixed martial arts, it's time for Glove Up or Shut Up from AngryMarks.com.
And welcome everybody to another episode of Glove Up or Shut Up, right here on AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter H. I'm joined once again by my co-host from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
And we're joined once again by the legendary capital T, Todd Martin.
Legendary? Well, that's nice. Sure, I'm not coming from Nebraska. How are you guys doing?
We're doing all right, but things in the MMA world are not all right. It seems like every day somebody's failing a drug test.
Yeah. There's it's been quite the run, and I gotta say, I'm still smarting from the news today of Hector Lombard failing a drug test. Because if you had to make me list guys that I wouldn't have possibly expected to have ever failed a drug test, Hector Lombard would have been very high on the list.
Well, I think that might be somewhat facetious, but he did say in an interview a couple of months ago that he thought TRT was for losers and anybody who needed TRT should get out of the sport. And those words are coming back to haunt him right now.
Yeah, it's funny. It feels like everyone who's failed a drug test at one point has some sort of quote where they categorically rip and deny use and rip anyone that would. Because Anderson Silva had a similar quote.
Where do we stand on Henderson right now anyway? Is he still denying it now that he got back the other test that says that it's clean?
Last I'd heard, he was still denying it.
All right. Well, Peter, what do you make of this latest failure with Hector Lombard?
I'm really shocked and I'm really upset because I was hoping to see Rory and Hector fight in Montreal, so I'm not sure what the new fight's going to be if they're even rescheduling that fight.
Yeah, I know they pulled Hector Lombard from the card, but I hadn't heard about a replacement. Todd, did you hear anything about that?
No, I haven't. I mean, my very strong assumption is that Rory will get a different opponent at some point in the relatively near future, although I don't know who that will necessarily be.
And speaking of failures, Peter and I didn't get a chance to talk about this last week since it broke between then and now, but John Fitch failed a drug test as well.
Yeah, yes. That was pretty ridiculous.
Go ahead, Todd.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I was sort of joking earlier about Lombard as a guy that you would, he rang off every warning bell you'd possibly expect in terms of his physique and what he looked like, and
yeah, that's why I said you were being facetious, because just looking at him, he doesn't pass the eye test. But go on, sorry.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and Fitch is on the other side of the spectrum, and he was a guy that always had talked about his vegan lifestyle, and he was a guy that throughout his career had never had that sort of puffed up look that you associate with performance-enhancing drugs, although obviously always a guy that was in very good shape. But I think between the two, it suggests something that, I mean, it isn't exactly a new lesson that you can't tell who's on and who's off performance-enhancing drugs just by looking at what they look like.
No, Tim Sylvia never looked like a steroid guy either, and he got popped.
Yep.
Physique alone does not equal testing positive or negative. It's just simply whether or not people are trying to get an edge. And lately I just feel like everybody has always been trying to get an edge and just more people are getting caught.
Yeah, I don't even know necessarily that it's more. I think just the fact that they've been doing more out of competition testing has led to more test failures.
So in your opinion, does this taint Anderson Silva's record? This is something that we've touched on a little bit, but I want your opinion on it, Todd, that it seems like because he wasn't being tested out of competition before, now all of those other fights that he had on that long winning streak, you might wonder if maybe he was taking something.
I mean, to some degree. I mean, I think you've got to take that into account with anybody that has a failure. But I mean, I've always been of the sort of feeling that there are lots and lots and lots of people cheating, and I don't really hold it as much against people as a lot of people do, in that I just don't have confidence that just because you don't fail a drug test means that you're clean all the way, in any sport. So I don't really look at it as like, a guy that fails a drug test is, is on this different category than everyone else. Just because I don't have the feeling that most of the other people were entirely clear throughout their career. I think everyone's looking for shortcuts here and there, and guys that you wouldn't expect. I mean, Royce Gracie is a guy that failed the drug test late in his career, and nobody even remembers that at this point. I think when it comes to fan perception and people looking at the sort of the overall trajectory of his career, I don't think it's something that people are going to hold against him particularly strongly, but I think it is something that will get brought up.
Well, I don't remember if they overturned the result of the Royce Gracie fight at that K1 Dynamite show, but they did overturn Anderson Silva's win to a no contest. So if he wanted to go out with a win at the tail end of his career, that now is not possible. He has to either come back and fight again after his suspension is lifted, or he has to just skulk away and accept that he didn't get a win in his last fight.
Yeah, I mean, as much as sort of those official record books matter to people, I've never, I mean, to me, like, I think it sort of puts an asterisk on anything, but I think a fight is a fight. If you win a fight, if you lose a fight, you've still won or lost that fight. I think that's less so when it comes to drugs, performance enhancing drugs, but I felt that more strongly in particular when it comes to marijuana, which has led to some overturned results and other performance, recreational drugs.
It's weird that sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't lead to a fight being overturned, because I interviewed Fernando Gonzalez about this, and his fight with Carl Parisian, I thought that was going to be overturned, and it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies still by the jurisdiction, because it's up to the discretion of an individual jurisdiction. I mean, this didn't start happening where they could overturn things until a few years ago, and it first was tried at a few places. I remember Nevada was one of the earlier places that tried it out, and I think other places have implemented that over time. But I don't think it's a guarantee that any place has to necessarily abide by that general rule.
All right. Well, I guess it's up to each individual commission in each state. But Peter, going back to something that Todd said a few minutes ago, I want to get your thoughts. Do you feel that it's a level playing field if everybody's cheating and that it's just all even and a fight's a fight? Or do you think this sport is in serious jeopardy now that we've had this many failures in such a short amount of time?
Well, I think with the hardcore fans, like the speculation of there's a lot more cheating than what is like what we're seeing, you know what I mean? Like, there's out of competition, people are getting popped more and more these days. So what I'm thinking is now the casual fans are looking at it and thinking, are these guys like on cycle, off cycle? You know, what's the deal? These guys aren't clean. Like, this is one of the reasons why GSP stepped away from the sport, is because the prevalent use of PEDs. Now, my question to you, Todd, is, do you think this tarnishes the legacy of both John Jones and Anderson Silva? And do you think that in some weird way it boosts the legacy of GSP because he never got popped for drugs?
I mean, not in terms of whether it affects John Jones and Anderson Silva's legacy. I mean, that sort of goes in the conversation we were just having. I think it does to some degree, in that it's something people will remember. I think with Anderson Silva, it's an issue of sort of, in terms of the integrity of the performance and the value of that. With John Jones, I think it's more a personal thing, just sort of how you're perceived having failed a drug test for cocaine. As far as the difference between him and George St. Pierre, I've heard that point made by other people, and I don't know that I all the way buy it. Just because, George, I have a lot of admiration for George. I mean, he's a tremendous fighter. And I mean, I don't know whether he has or he hasn't used drugs, but just because he hasn't failed the drug test, he also hasn't done a lot of out of competition drug testing throughout his career. I don't take it as some sort of guarantee that George St. Pierre has never used performance enhancing drugs, because it's the same thing with Anderson Silva. I wouldn't have expected, probably on balance, that Anderson Silva would have used performance enhancing drugs beforehand. You look at individual excellent athletes and you tend to hold them to a high standard. But I mean, I don't rule out the idea offhand that someone has used performance enhancing drugs in the past. And I don't think that just because someone hasn't been caught doesn't mean that, we can thereby conclude that throughout their career they've never used that. So I don't necessarily draw broad conclusions about that versus any athlete that you would bring up. But it is what it is. I mean, one thing I will say about Anderson Silva, just sort of a final thought on that, is that a lot of fighters, if you say they're using performance-enhancing drugs and you tie it to a specific talent that they used within the sport, like if you look at Sammy Sosa or Mark McGuire or Jeff Bagwell, these were guys that became very big. Now that Jeff Bagwell was caught with performance-enhancing drugs, but that was always something that people associated with him, and his face exploded and his body exploded throughout his career. Which goes into our earlier discussion about guys not getting caught, not necessarily meaning they're clean. Anyway, those guys, like, their careers were based off of hitting really hard home runs that went long distances. That's the sort of thing that steroids are going to benefit you in. Anderson Silva's game, while he did have power, was very much a game of speed, of agility, of really good timing, of reflexes. And that's the sort of stuff that I don't think performance-enhancing drugs have as much of an effect on. So I think people, when evaluating Anderson Silva, will take that sort of thing into account. I think, a lot of the things that he was so great at aren't really things that have a lot to do with performance-enhancing drugs. Now, if he was using them throughout his career, did they have effect on his career? Sure. But I would liken it more to like a Barry Bonds, where, Barry Bonds wouldn't have hit as many home runs as he did if he hadn't been using performance-enhancing drugs on the second half of his career. But this guy still, you could see from the first half of his career, when he was a guy that looked completely different, was a transcendent talent. And his natural talent and ability to play baseball really didn't have a lot to do with performance-enhancing drugs. You could see that before he ever did it. I think it's the same thing with Anderson Silva. I mean, if you can see the talent in the guy, and they do the sorts of things that you don't closely associate with the benefits of performance-enhancing drugs, I think it's sort of a different category than a guy that is, has a small physique, all of a sudden blows up to a big physique, and all of a sudden he's knocking out everybody in the world, which, fits the category of, fits the trajectory of different fighters, not necessarily Anderson Silva.
Yeah, I think Alistair Overeem is one of those guys you can actually point at and say he was kind of having a middling career before he blew up and got really big, and then he started knocking out people. He's one of those you could definitely correlate to drugs improved him. He was a performance-enhanced athlete.
I don't know why you'd bring up Alistair Overeem. I don't feel like anything I said was implying him in specific. But now that you say that, I don't know.
Oh, well, Peter, you've got a whole bunch of things you want to talk about, not just steroids. So what else is on your list of news for the week?
Well, just on a little side note to what we're talking about, is there any update on Nick Diaz?
In what sense? Like, what his punishment is, or?
Yeah, because technically it's his third strike. Doesn't that mean he's done? Like, there was talk about him possibly retiring, but I haven't heard much talk about it this past week.
I believe he sent out a tweet that said, "I'm done fighting," and left it at that. But Todd, you can update me if I'm missing anything there.
Yeah, they haven't done the hearing yet. So at the hearing, that's when the punishment will hand down. I mean, they don't have it's not a hard, fast rule like some sports have, where you're banned for life if you have 3 drug test failures, but certainly the punishments can increase each time out. I think you are probably going to be viewed differently with 3 weed test failures than 3 steroid test failures, but the commissions have not liked Nick Diaz historically for a variety of reasons that Nick Diaz has brought upon himself. So I'm expecting a harsh punishment when the hearing comes, and then I'll take some time off and he'll be back.
Yeah, I could see them handing down a 2-year or longer ban for his latest failure, but that's just pure speculation on my part.
I wonder if they're going to put the hearing on Fight Pass.
They put stuff on that you wouldn't expect them to necessarily, so I wouldn't be surprised.
For me, that's just made the whole Anderson Silva failure more entertaining, because I watched that on Fight Pass. I watched that hearing, and all the trouble they had getting him on the phone in the first place was amusing enough. But then when they asked him how his training was going, when he finally got on the phone, he was like, "Is normal." I'm like, okay, nothing is normal with Anderson Silva at this point. Oh, man. Okay, Peter, you got your side note in, but back to the main notes. What else do you want to talk about right now in news?
Well, I guess just random news and notes before we talk about the big show this weekend.
Multiple big shows this weekend. Ben Rothwell is looking to return in May,
and he thinks 2 straight wins will get him a title shot. He's ranked number 10 right now. I don't know.
That's pretty high to vault from 10 to 1 in 2 fights. You'd have to be at like number 1 and number 2 to vault that high, I think.
Todd, what do you think? Do you think 2 wins gets Rothwell a title shot?
No. Granted, I mean, we don't know who he'll necessarily face in those 2 fights. I mean, if it's big enough opponents, that's not a particularly stacked division. But I mean, Ben Rothwell is always a guy that's been aspirational. You know, you've seen it through his post-fight interviews, through the way that he frames himself. He sort of has ideas about sort of marketing himself and sort of presenting himself in a way that will do well. So I don't fault a guy for aspiring to do big things. I think it's unlikely, but, good for him for setting high goals.
Yeah, I think it's a murderer's row up there in the heavyweight division. I mean, if he gets past, a few guys, he could get in the conversation after 2 wins, maybe getting a number 1 contender fight or something, but I don't think 2 fights will get him that title shot he wants.
Yeah, seriously, he's gonna have to beat somebody like Stipe Miocic or Travis Brown to get that number 1 shot.
And Brown's on a tear right now, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, so all my notes here, McDonald, Lombard fight getting canceled. There's a bunch of Ronda Rousey news we can talk about in a second.
Well, yeah, actually, let's get Todd's opinion on that, because Ronda said that she wanted to weigh her natural weight for the swimsuit spread in Sports Illustrated. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I guess we'll see what the photos look like, because, it's possible that was sort of an idea that she had, and that then, she did end up, trying to drop as much weight as she could. I mean, I guess we'll see what the photos look like, but, I mean, whatever. I mean, people, I think, I don't think it's that big of a deal, just in the sense that this isn't something new. We've seen, a bunch of athletes, be in Sports Illustrated for a number of years now with that, same exact idea, where, they'll pose and they'll they'll sort of show different molds for what a female athlete can look like. I don't know whether it was Serena Williams posing in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue or the ESPN body issue, but I mean, that was sort of the similar idea, where she posed in a, bikini and skimpy outfits and, presented a very different, body type than even Ronda Rousey and a lot of, sort of the swimsuit models. So I think you've seen over the years a number of sort of, of different types of body types than just what you would see in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. So I don't necessarily make that much out of it, but it's a cool thing. And, certainly Ronda has achieved enough at this point where, she can bring some prestige to Sports Illustrated and sort of add to the interest in that issue, as well as, the vice versa of her getting some rub from being in the, no pun intended, from being in the issue.
Yeah, I think that actually benefits her for the Kat Zingano fight. I don't know that it equals like 100,000 buys on pay-per-view, but it does keep her name, again, no pun intended here, in the circulation.
Yeah, and she, there was actually, speaking of that Kat Zingano fight, there's, and of magazines, there's a really good article on Kat Zingano in the most recent, ESPN, the magazine. So, both women are getting some, pretty solid publicity leading into their fight at the end of February.
Well, cool. I just got that issue in the mail the other day, so I'll have to pop it open and find that article.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Demetrius Johnson and Koji Horiguchi are fighting in the semi-main event spot that was vacated by Rory McDonald and Hector Lombard. So I guess the Canadian fans lose a fight and get a title fight instead.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a fight that anyone's clamoring for. I mean, the funny thing is, after Kyoji, won his last fight against Louis Gaudinot in UFC 182, they asked him about getting a title fight, and, he was completely down on the idea. He was like, I'm not ready. I haven't done enough. And I agree with him. He didn't look ready. He didn't look like he'd done enough in that last fight, but, which wasn't a good fight at all. But hey, they've got to find challengers for Demetrius Johnson. He's pretty much cleaned out the division. So here you go. I mean, Horiguchi's young. He has an impressive record, and he's generally looked pretty good in his UFC career. So, it's a fine fight. It's better than some of, the other recent Demetrius Johnson title fights, but it's not one that, I think is going to generate a tremendous amount of interest, and it's not one that I think the odds makers are going to have as a particularly close fight.
Well, Peter's asked me this before, Todd, so I'll ask you. Do you think it's time for Demetrius to move back up to bantamweight?
I don't think I would, no. I think the thing is, I think there's plenty of fights at 135 right now. Well, maybe not plenty, but I think there are some fights you can make at 135 right now. I don't know that, Demetrius moving up to 135 is the sort of fight that's going to generate a huge amount of interest. And then either you have the 135 champion or the 125 pound champion lose. So I don't see just a tremendous amount of upside to the idea. I mean, the truth is I never would have created the 125 pound division. I think they'd be better off just having those people fighting in the 135 pound division. Some of them would just be smaller. And that's, essentially what you'd be doing with Demetrius Johnson. But given that they have established this division, and they brought in a bunch of fighters on the smaller side, and Demetrius Johnson's a champion of it, I don't see enough upside in that fight to make it worth it for the downsides. Maybe somewhere down the road.
And that's kind of what my argument was to Peter was, well, he's dominant at 125, but at 135 he wasn't, so why would he go back up to a weight class where he wasn't faster than everybody when at 125 he's clearly the fastest fighter in that weight class?
Yeah, it's a great division for him. He's done really well there. I don't know that I would disagree slightly with your categorization of his career at 135. I think he did pretty darn well at 135, really. I mean, when he went down, he was 13-2, 14-2, something like that. And the early fight that he lost with Brad Pickett was just him not being as developed of a fighter. I think right now, if they rematch, he's going to kill Brad Pickett. And then the other loss was to Dominic Cruz, who is the champion at the 135 weight class. A guy that doesn't have a single unavenged loss in his entire career. So I think that Demetrius Johnson could do pretty darn well at 135 at this stage of time. And I think he could even, I wouldn't count him out as winning the title at that weight class. I just don't think that, given that you've got a 125 pound weight class at this point in time, I think even if he moves up there, then that just means, and he does well at 135, that just means you've got this 125 pound weight class that's even more of a wasteland than it is right now.
Fair enough. But either way, I think John Lineker has to find a weight class bigger than flyweight. He's definitely not fighting at 125.
John Lineker. I hope they keep him at 125 just because it's so much fun waiting for the next John Lineker fight and seeing if he missed weight yet again. I think they should just keep doing it. Let it be a running joke.
I think if he next time misses weight, like at the weigh-ins, here's Lineker on the scale, and if he fails, you hear the Price is Right fail horn.
It's perfect. I love it.
Now, I said on the show last week, I was thinking of potential contenders for Johnson, and Horiguchi was the man that I predicted last week, so I'm almost feeling like, usually I'm the fool on this show, but I'm the what's that word, Stevie, you say?
Prognosticator. You're the prognosticator.
That's it. Let's see, other news. Sarah Kaufman against Alexis Davis 3, UFC 186 in Montreal. So this card is getting stacked again. And with the hometown. Go ahead.
I don't know if stacked is necessarily the word I come with for that fight, but it's a perfectly viable fight. And, I think Alexis Davis, because of the way that she lost her title fight to Ronda Rousey, I guess you could say the same thing about Sarah Kaufman, but not as many people saw it. Both of them very much need to, put together some wins in impressive fashion if they want another title fight. So it's an important fight for both of them.
I wonder if Kaufman will have any rust on her, though. She's been out for over a year.
Yeah, and she didn't look that impressive before she left. It's important that she come back and she look impressive because, one other thing about that, and we haven't seen as much of this because the sport in terms of the women's side is relatively young still, but women's sports traditionally, in most women's sports, there's been an earlier peak and an earlier fall off period than with men. And we'll see what happens, over the course of the next, 15 years as to whether that happens in women's MMA as well. But, it's entirely possible if it follows, figure skating, tennis, although there are counterexamples in these sports. But in general, you see, women peaking in their early to mid 20s. And then by, sometimes even by early 30s, they're sort of on their way out. And so Sarah Kaufman is a woman that's, about to turn 30. It's entirely possible that she's seen, her best days in the past already.
Now you're making me wonder if we're ever going to see Serena Williams fail a PED.
Well, I mean, Serena Williams is the big, counterexample to that. I mean, it's amazing how she's been able to have such longevity while really iconic, female tennis players of, just last generation before that weren't able to string together success for such a long period of time.
And I think it's interesting too because early in their careers, Venus was the one who was tagged as she'll be the champion forever, she'll dominate everybody, but her sister has actually risen above her in terms of stature.
Yeah, and Venus had a pretty long career too, as far as it went.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Peter, what's next?
World Series of Fighting champ Marlon Moraes basically is calling out all the champions in his weight class, saying he's ready to face the champion in any organization.
Yeah, he said that in my interview with him for MMA Mania. He said any champion from any promotion could come to World Series of Fighting. I would fight them and I would beat them.
Oh boy. I don't know about that.
I hear Todd scoffing at that idea.
No, I was just chuckling. I mean, it's the same thing with Ben Rothwell. I do not fault this guy for aspiring to big things, and I think, it's the thing you want to say. I mean, you don't want to say, and we've seen this from fighters in other organizations where they're like, they're the champion of the organization, and they're like, I really feel like I should be rated in the top 5. It's like, I mean, what are you saying about yourself? You're supposed to be the champion. So good for Marlon Moraes, trying to say that he can beat the best guys in that weight class. What I was laughing at was the idea of anybody else saying, okay, UFC saying, okay, yeah, we'll go send over our champion to go fight Marlon Moraes in World Series of Fighting. Good luck with that, buddy.
Well, I did try to kind of gently say that when I interviewed him. I'm like, well, anything is possible. And when I said anything is possible, what I really meant was that's not going to happen.
Yes.
I don't know, they should just send a few fighters, like a goon squad of UFC fighters in the top 10 or 15, and just sitting cage side, just taking notes on his next fight in Edmonton.
I did like that as the old pro wrestling thing where they would be scouting their opponent and they'd be sitting at ringside and taking notes, whether it was a manager or whatnot. I think that's a good idea. I think they should do that for fighters that are actually doing that in the UFC. You establish when back when Anderson Silva was champion, you could have had, when Dan Henderson was fighting, they cut to Ed Soares sitting in the front row taking notes on his laptop. That would have been great.
Conor McGregor should be sitting cage side with a pad and pen, watching his opponent there.
Absolutely. And it could be like the Genius, where when you look at the thing and what he has written down, it's just like doodles of him destroying Jose Aldo.
Or writing down great things to say in his post-fight interviews.
Yes, there you go.
Well, as long as we've got Marlon Moraes on the brain, I want to ask Todd his thoughts on the card this Thursday from Edmonton and the main event with the grandson of a legendary pro wrestler, the gentleman Josh Hill.
I mean, it's an okay card. I mean, Marlon Moraes has really been rolling of late. I was surprised how much I was just looking at the odds, yesterday, and I was surprised how wide the odds were, given that he's fighting an undefeated young fighter that's, shown pretty solid promise. I think it's a solid, main event by, World Series of Fighting standards. Then the rest of the card is just sort of fights. I don't think it's a card that's gonna generate a lot of interest or a lot of viewers on television, but that's sort of the standard with World Series of Fighting these days.
And as Josh noted to me when I talked to him, the only losses he's ever experienced were on the Ultimate Fighter. So he's like, well, that doesn't count, but it still bothers me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of weird when they call people undefeated. Well, it depends on the way they frame it, but when they, try to just gloss over really decisive losses on this or that, I think you should take that into account. But, officially undefeated, it's still impressive.
Yeah.
Didn't Cerrone say the same thing?
About what? About when was he on the Ultimate Fighter?
No, his opponent was like, I'm undefeated, and Cerrone's like, no, he's not.
Yes, that's right. Miles Jury, yeah. That was a bad night for Miles Jury. I think Miles Jury really got exposed there.
Yeah, and he tried to kick the leg out of his leg at the end of that fight.
That's true. That was fun. That was even, I was there for that one, and that was, the energy that he was throwing those kicks with. It was something to behold. He was frustrated. Cowboy was.
Yeah, oh,
It's like the old Simpsons. Go ahead, Stevie.
Oh, he was even still frustrated at the post-fight interview. He was like, yeah, I was trying to kick the shit out of him.
Yep.
Somebody made a gif of that, and basically at the end they put the Simpsons clip of "Stop it, he's already dead."
Oh, man. Oh, shoot.
All right, well, I guess we should talk about Bellator on Friday night there. That's a big card.
That's indeed a big card. Storm Shlemenko going up against Melvin Menoff, both looking to rebound from losses in their last fight. So, well, no, technically last Bellator fight, because Shlemenko won a fight in Russia that I think nobody other than the people in that building saw.
Yeah, that I don't think that was on NBC.
No.
Although I'll need to look through my records to verify that. I mean, it's just sort of a fight. I am a lot lower on Melvin Manhoef than a lot of people are. My feeling has been for a while that he's washed up. He's scored a few wins against, carefully picked opponents, but I don't think he's really particularly done well against solid opposition in either kickboxing or MMA for a while. With that said, I mean, this is a fight that plays to his strengths. I mean, Alexander Shlemenko is not a guy that's known for going to the ground. I think he's going to stand there. He's going to strike, and Manhoef has a lot of power. So, I mean, I could see both guys winning the fight. It's key for Shlemenko in that he was a guy that was really gathering a lot of momentum. He had won so many fights in a row in Bellator, and he was really sort of, becoming one of their key stars. And then he had that fight with Tito Ortiz, and Tito Ortiz just muscled him down and choked him out. And then he came back and he lost again in his next fight after that. So it's imperative for this guy to, sort of establish that was a blip on the radar as opposed to an ongoing trend. So it's an important fight. Manhoef is just sort of in the stage of his career where, they throw him in with, fights that they think are going to be entertaining, and, someone generally goes to sleep.
And I've got two keys for this fight as well as regards Melvin Manhoef and his chances. The first is that he is significantly older than Storm Shlemenko. I know they've both had a lot of fights. There's like 100 fights combined between the two of them, but Manhoef is 38 years old, and when you combine his kickboxing and his MMA records together, that's a lot of fights for a 38-year-old. So when you say he's washed up, Todd, I know where you're coming from on that. So Shlemenko's had over 50 fights too, but he's younger, he's 30, and the advantage for me that I see for him is that Manhoef fades really quickly. He comes out swinging hard and hoping to land, but if you get him past that first round, he fades fast. So all Shlemenko has to do is survive a round with him, and then he can take over.
Yep, I agree with that analysis. And another thing that sort of plays into that general narrative is that, and in terms of when you talk about the wear on these guys' body, Shlemenko is a guy that's only been knocked out once in his career, and Melvin Manhoef has been knocked out God knows how many times. I mean, I think he's been knocked out more times than Andrei Arlovsky. That chin, it can be caught at any point with him. Shlemenko, I think, has a tendency to stand up through punishment. He's a guy who went 5 rounds with Hector Lombard, who's a guy who's known to hit very hard. So, I mean, I think he's got a lot more durability than Melvin Manhoef, who I think is apt to get stopped if he gets caught right on the button.
Yeah, I think if Joe Schilling can stop Melvin Manhoef, pretty much anybody can.
Hey, come on now. Joe Schilling is one of the best kickboxers in the world. That was like the number one talking point I got out of Joe Rogan's commentary in the last show.
Yeah, well, Joe has to come up with something. So, anyway, Peter, your thoughts on the fight?
You're not comparing his chin to Glass Joe, are you? I think with Shlemenko, his back's up against the wall. He has to prove himself in the North American audience. His last fight in Russia, you're right. Only people in the building saw that fight. I think for him to get back to some type of prominence, he's going to have to win this fight. And he's got an opponent here that I shouldn't say easily take care of in the first round, but one good shot, he's been knocked out, as Todd said, God knows how many times. I mean, hopefully in training camp he wears a full helmet and doesn't do what, was it Silva that trains or Big Nog without the helmet?
Vanderlei definitely. He trains full without the helmet and just lets people clubber him. He's always been crazy. That's why he's called the Axe Murderer. He's not right in the head.
I I got Shlemenko winning this in the first round, Stevie.
That's fine. I thought it would go more than one round, but yeah, I've got Shlemenko winning.
All right, what about Daniel Weichel and Pat Curran?
Weichel,
sorry.
Yeah, I've got Pat Curran in this one because I like Daniel Weichel. His 3 straight wins are impressive in Bellator. He's definitely built up some momentum, but I don't think he's going to be able to get Pat Curran to the ground. And that's a problem because Weichel wins most of his fights by submission. And if you can't take Pat Curran off his feet and you go to a decision with him, odds are he has lost some fights by decision, but he's also won a lot by decision. So it can be kind of a coin flip, but I think with a decision, he can get the win in a 3-round fight.
Yeah, I favor Pat Curran too. I mean, it's honestly not a fight that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. But just looking at the relative strengths of the two guys, I agree with what Stevie was saying. I mean, Weichel's a guy that's generally done better on the ground. That's been his bread and butter. And Pat Curran's a very good guy at avoiding turning into that sort of fight. He's very good at turning into a striking match or he's very good at keeping a fight where he wants it, whether it's sort of him on top or him at distance, clinching. He's very good at dictating the way the fight goes down, and that's not something that I think Weichel will be particularly happy about. So yeah, I definitely favor Curran in the fight.
Yeah, I think if Curran loses this fight, it might be the upset of the night there. I think Curran wins this fight. I hate to say decision, but yeah, I have that feeling it probably will. I think, he's gonna defend the takedown all night and try to win on a stand-up fight on the feet. Maybe he'll land a head kick that'll knock him out, but I have a feeling this fight goes to decision and Curran wins maybe 2-1.
And then he gets right back in that title picture again. Like I said to him when we talked last week, it'll be his first fight since 2011 where he's either not fighting for a title or defending a title. It's weird to see him involved in a fight where there's not the featherweight title on the line.
Wow, yeah, it's an interesting stat. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, every fight since 2011, he either fought for a title or lost a title. So that's his career trajectory for quite a while now.
At least you know he's got good cardio.
That's true.
You keep training for 5-round fights. I mean, you got good cardio.
Well, he said that when I interviewed him. He's like, thank God it's a 3-round fight. I don't have to go quite as hard in training now.
All right, what do you think of the next fight between Bud and Holloway?
Well, Gabrielle Holloway is a late replacement for Toledo Nogueira, and she only fought 2 weeks ago, so I think this is bad news for her. I mean, props to take the fight on short notice, but I think Julia Budd just absolutely tears her apart.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about Holloway, at this stage because she's just fought on smaller competition, but I definitely do favor Bud. I mean, she's been looking good lately, but I mean, she's not the sort of fighter that tends to roll through opponents. So I don't know necessarily that it'll be a dominant performance, but I think she'll control the fight. I definitely favor her in the fight.
Yeah, I got Bud winning this one as well. I just hope it's an entertaining fight and not a snorefest.
And then there's the opener, Chris Honeycutt, coming back from his last dominant win on the prelims and facing Clayton McFarlane, who, speaking of, you've probably never seen him fight except in the building that night. That's Clayton McFarlane. I know nothing about the guy.
No, yeah, same here.
He's 4-0. That's all we can say. He's 4-0.
Yeah, it's just a fight they're throwing on there. It's not a fight that's likely to lead to big things for either guy anytime soon.
Well, I think they like Chris Honeycutt based on his performance on the prelims. I think they would like to see him rise up through the ranks and be a guy they can put on TV. So they're giving him this chance, but I wouldn't say it's a pushover fight for him because his opponent is undefeated, the same as him. And one thing I can tell you about him is that McFarlane, in his 3 wins, that none of them lasted more than 75 seconds.
Oh, goody. Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, it's not one of those fights they put together off the prelims, but on the entire prelim card, is there anything that piques your interest?
Who are you asking, me or Todd?
Whoever.
Todd, you go first then.
No, not really, to be perfectly honest. It's not, I mean, this isn't one of Bellator's big shows, so, I mean, they're not throwing a lot of guys out there that particularly jump out at you. And moreover, Scott Coker, his philosophy towards undercards has always been, to give less relative to Dana White's philosophy, relative to Bjorn Rebney's philosophy, relative to a lot of fight promoters. His idea was always, the fights that we're running on television, those are our key fights. And as far as the undercard goes, we'll just throw guys on there. So I don't think going forward you're going to see a lot of big fights come up on preliminary cards because that's just never been a big priority of Scott Coker.
The only fight I see on the prelims that I wonder about is Nick Bustamante at lightweight. I wonder if he's related to Murilo Bustamante or if that's just a coincidence. Probably a coincidence.
No idea. Probably a coincidence, yeah.
I mean, you can look at these names on the prelims and you just have to guess for most of them. It's like Art Arcianiga, Nicholas Sperling, Mason Fowler. I mean, honestly, unless somebody pulls a Chris Honeycutt here and has an impressive finish in a fight, they're just journeymen at this point. They're just filling out space.
Yeah, and if you're looking for sort of family connections, George Zuniga is actually the nephew of former Melrose Place star Daphne Zuniga, but that's about it.
Oh, really?
No, I just made that up.
You had me on there for a second. I actually believed it. All right, Peter. We're going to talk about the Thatch Henderson card now?
Yeah, let's go with UFC Fight Night in Broomfield. 10 p.m. start as always on Fox Sports 1, TSN in Canada. I'm pretty sure it's TSN 4. I don't know. It's the wacky they have 5 different channels up here now. They're kind of doing what ESPN does, so it's like different regions are like 1, 2, 5, I think, but like the MMA, everybody gets channel 4 if you subscribe to TSN.
The
it's not like Sportsnet.
That's a big one.
The quad, or 5, the Cinco. All right. We talked about prelims before in Bellator with no names on it. This fight has some big names on prelims here, so
big names
Elliot,
like James Muntarsi.
I meant the.
Well, to be fair to the guy,
how dare you, Stevie?
To be fair to the guy, I did see him fight in San Antonio, and he had a pretty good performance there.
He's fighting Cody Pfister, so. I mean, it's a fight pass prelim, so I don't expect too much from it, but you never know. Once that door closes, anything is possible.
Indeed.
What about Elliot Makovsky?
If you want to move somebody up in the flyweight division and create more contenders, you need to have guys like Elliot and Makovsky square off against each other. That's the only way you're going to shake things up in the flyweights.
Yeah, it's a little It's a little surprising that it's on the. I guess it doesn't matter that much because the whole thing's on FS1, except for the one card at the bottom. But it's a little surprising that that's sort of the prelim portion, and the Ray Borg, Chris Kaledes fight is on the main card because both Makovsky and Elliott are a little bit higher profile than Borg and Kaledes as far as the opponents they've fought, as far as the generally the profile of the fights they've been having. Makovsky, of course, former Bellator champion, a guy that was stringing some wins together, and people were thinking that he might be in line for a flyweight fight before a flyweight title shot before his loss to Jussier Formiga in his last fight. Whereas Tim Elliott has fought a bunch of high quality opposition and has of course lost his last couple of fights to Joseph Benavidez and Ali Bagotinov, who are two title contenders. So these are guys that have fought very high level opposition, and both of them are guys that you could see getting back into that title mix if they could string together some wins. So as far as prelims go, I think it's one of the more significant, which tends to be the case with the flyweight division in the prelims because the division is a little bit thinner. They don't tend to promote the guys as high on the card. You'll frequently get relatively solid flyweight fights in the in that division, whereas if you have like just a random welterweight fight or lightweight fight on the preliminary card, it's likely that it's going to be guys you don't know very well.
Side note, segue real quick. I remember at one point when there were only 10 slots in the rankings and you had to fill them out, there were like 12 fighters in the flyweight division at the time. So you pretty much had to look at the list and go, okay, which 2 guys am I leaving off this week?
Yeah. It's slim pickings at times.
They have beefed it up a little since they went to 15, but like you said, with that division, you're pretty much having one, if not both fighters in the rankings anytime you have a flyweight fight.
Yeah, and for that reason, when I do rankings for the LA Times, and I only list 5 fighters in that division just because it doesn't have the depth of a lot of the other divisions. So I don't think it really merits going 10 deep, even at this point, which is deeper than it was at one point.
Very true. All right, Peter, what else on the prelims do you want to hit on?
I guess Efren Escudero and Rodrigo de Lima. I mean, Escudero coming back, second fight back in the UFC. He lost his last fight. I think if he loses this one, do you think he's back to the minors, or does he stick around for a third fight?
Could be going to RFA or Legacy or somewhere if he loses.
Yeah, Todd, what do you think?
I mean, it's hard to figure out those things now, because there used to be the rule where if you lost, well, at one point, if you were nobody and you lost 2 fights in a row, you'd be gone. And then there's sort of the rule that 3 fights was the way to go. And now it's just sort of, whatever. They'll keep guys on if they like them. So I think it's sort of a deal where if you have an impressive performance, they might keep you around even if you lost a bunch of fights in a row. Whereas if you have a dull fight, even if you've just lost 1 or 2, they might let you go. So I think it depends on what sort of fight you get.
I think it's kind of interesting that Rodrigo is dropping down to lightweight for this fight. He looked pretty big as a welterweight. I hope this weight cut is a good one for him.
I just look at building off Todd's point here, they keep certain fighters around, even if they lost 3 fights in a row, but that only applies really if it's like a regional fighter, like if you're a Canadian or a European or you're, an Asian fighter, and you don't want to build that market in the Asian market or the Ireland or Scotland, they're going to keep an Irish fighter who's lost 2 or 3, but he's really good for the press and really good with the public, so they're going to want to see him fight, and he's lost 3 in a row. But
honestly, they could cut either one of these guys with a loss because the lightweight division is so deep, they're not going to miss them.
Yeah,
I'll miss them if they're gone. Maybe not you, but
I just look at it like, go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, just quickly, on the regional point that you were making, I think if you're looking at it from that standpoint, I think the guy that's more likely to stick around is Efrain, because he's Hecho in Mexico, which is a market that they are looking to target. Obviously not a Mexican American, but a guy that is a part of that community, and that's not a community that's nearly as deep in fighting talent as Brazil is. So he's a guy that could find himself sticking around, particularly with a card coming up in June.
That's true, but they've shown a willingness to let Efren Escudero go before, and this is a guy who won the Ultimate Fighter and wound up without a job, so it doesn't strike me as, they have a Mexican market they want to target, but maybe he's not the guy they think can capture it.
Well, you should consider, though, that back when they cut him, that was before they had the big deal there in Mexico, the TV deal, before things had sort of opened up there. So it's a different landscape than it was back then.
That's a fair point. I accept that.
I just also, with so many fights this year scheduled, do you think they're really going to do major cuts? Like, we've seen some weeks where they cut 5 or 10 fighters. I don't think we're going to have a big purge anytime soon of the rosters with 40 or 50 shows in a year.
That's true. They do need warm bodies. I always say that on this show.
And of course, Stevie's favorite fighter is the main event of the prelims, Nick Lentz.
Well, favorite just because of the self-generated controversy. I like how Nick Lentz always gets himself in these situations.
Speaking of warm bodies.
Yeah, Levon Makshvili, that's definitely a warm body for him.
Well, I remember on this show we kept saying if Nick Lentz loses, he's done, then he reels off like so many wins in a row. It's like, okay, seriously?
He's honestly, fun. He's fun.
I think the heat with him has dissipated, because there was a point when he was having those terrible fights and they wanted to get rid of him, but that was ages ago. I think a lot of that is forgiven. I think at this point he's just sort of another guy not really making waves on the undercard.
Yeah, and he's 4-1 in his last 5. His only loss came against Chad Money Mendez, so really can't fault him for that one.
Yeah, well, you talked about ring rust earlier, and I think there's every possibility of that too, because it's been like 8 or 9 months since he's fought now. So I hope Nick Lentz has had a good camp and comes in ready for this fight.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Going on the main card, Ray Borg against Chris Kalidis? Chris Kalidis?
Kalidis, yeah, I think Kalidis.
So that's kicking off the main card in the flyweight division. So, Stevie, who you got?
Well, The Greek Assassin has an awesome nickname, but I don't think I could pick him just for that reason. I will say he looked really good in the fight against Patrick Holohan, who's sort of their poster boy for the Irish regional market right now, so.
Wait, hold up. Their poster boy for the Irish regional market right now?
I wanted to get Todd Martin's reaction to that statement, so I said something purposefully, completely absurd just to see what he would say. I'm trolling here. I'm taking over Brian Alvarez's spot.
He's their poster boy, like Rasul Butler is the poster boy for the Wizards.
Brian's in Hawaii now, so somebody's got to troll Todd Martin every once in a while. I'm filling in. Okay, all seriousness, no joking aside, I think that Ray Borg wins this fight.
Yeah, Borg's the guy they have a lot of, they see a lot in. I mean, that was the point I was making earlier about this being a little bit surprised these guys were on the card. That's the reason these guys are on the main card while the Elliott fight is on the lower card. Is it? They see a lot of potential in Borg. You could see it. He looked pretty good in a loss in his debut against Dustin Ortiz, and then he looked really good in his most recent fight against Shane Howell. He's a guy that I think, and he's very young. He's a guy that I think they think is going to be a potential force at 125. So,
yeah, and
I think that's really fair.
That was one of my favorite fights that night in San Antonio, just because of the fact that there were a lot of fights that went to decision. There were some boring fights that night, but he came out there and just blew through Shane Howell. So he's a guy that I expected big things from after that night.
Although he does need to work on his nickname, the Taz Mexican Devil. I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
It's not as cool as the Greek Assassin. I'll say that much.
I kind of like it. I mean, there's certain nicknames out there that are just really lame, and this one's not as lame as others we've seen, but it's in the middle, I would say, of originality.
I wouldn't call it lame or unoriginal. I just think it's kind of silly.
I was just happy when I saw Tamden the Barn Cat McCrory was added to the prelims of an upcoming World Series of Fighting card. That's a name I love. The Barn Cat.
And what a crazy story too, that guy. He was gone. I thought, for all intents and purposes, I thought the guy was dead. And then he pops up out of the middle of nowhere after not having fought in like 6 years and comes up with an incredibly impressive performance. That was a real highlight of that card, whenever that was.
Yeah, I'm glad to see him back too. I like you said, I didn't know where he went or what he was doing. Maybe he was the barn cat chasing mice. Maybe that's what he was doing to fill time.
And the other thing was so amusing about it is he looked like he was about 80 years old, and he's like 28. He looked like he was in his mid 40s. It was crazy.
And the other thing I'll never forget is the UFC that I saw him at live. He was moaning and complaining about the fact that he wanted to come out to a Death Clock song and UFC wouldn't approve it.
Our favorite Tamden McCrory memories.
Yes. We're probably reminiscing more about him than anybody else in this sport or following this sport does. So let's move on. Peter, what's next?
Oh, man.
What's your favorite Tamden McCrory memory, Peter?
Oh, it's gotta be the Death Clock thing. It's gotta be the Death Clock. Oh, man. Prezeris and Lee is the next fight in the lightweight division. I don't know. This is a coin flip fight for me, to be honest. I'm leaning towards Lee right now.
Prezeris is a guy with a lot of potential and only one loss to Paulo Thiago, so I'm going to lean to Prezeris on this one.
I'll also take Prezeris.
All right, that was brief.
I don't have anything to say about the fight.
Yeah.
They can't all be lengthy. They can't all be memories of Ted McCrory.
No. Dan Kelly.
Let's go back to Tamden McCrory. Remember? No, that's okay. Sorry.
Dan Kelly and Patrick Walsh next fight in the middleweight division.
Who are you asking first, me or Todd?
Well, I'll go with Todd first on this one.
I think that when you look at the names on this card, as far as the most generic names, these guys win in a landslide. Dan Kelly versus Patrick Walsh. Much less interesting than Nick Lentz versus Levin Makachashvili. I favor Dan Kelly in this fight. Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. Undefeated fighter. He's a guy they see, is potentially doing well in the Australian market. He hasn't fought outside of there, so that's a little bit of a red flag, but it's not like Patrick Walsh has had a lot of high profile fights at this point in his career either.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the 4-time Olympian in Dan Kelly. I mean, he fought for Australia and judo. I'm sure he'll have lots of judo offensive moves in his fight, but I really don't want to be Patrick Walsh in this one. I think Kelly wins in maybe first, second round.
Patrick Walsh struck me as an interesting guy on The Ultimate Fighter, and he did win his fight at the tough finale, even though obviously he didn't win the season. But he took a battering in that fight too, and it could have gone either way. And I think if you're looking at the guy with more upside in terms of his well-roundedness and his game, it's not Patrick Walsh.
All right, Neil Magny against Kichi Kunimoto, and I'm gonna go with Magny on this one. What about you, Stevie?
No, I like Kunimoto in this one. I think that he's continuing to improve, and at 33 years old, he might just be peaking right now. This might be his time, and I'll put him down for his 4th straight UFC win.
I guess I got to break the tie then. I really don't. You know what? I'm predicting a draw. 2 rounds, Magny winning 2 rounds to 1, but there's a point deduction, and so it's called a draw. I mean, as far as the fight goes, Neil Magny is a guy that I think a lot of people are seeing some potential in. He's won a bunch of fights in a row. He hasn't really been fighting particularly high profile opposition, but he's very physically talented. He's got nice range for the division. And I think he's a guy that they see as sort of an up and comer. So I think with Kunimoto, I don't think they see the same upside in him, even though he's won some fights in a row. He's a guy that's been around for a long time. He doesn't do anything particularly well. And he's a little bit older of a fighter. So I think this is Magny's fight.
I could see that, but I also, when I look at Magny's record, and yes, he has a ton of potential and he's a guy they have a lot of stock in, but he's also lost some fights that I expected him to win to guys like the Polish Pistola, Seth Baczynski, and Sergio Moraes. I wonder if he's maybe a little bit overrated.
Well, I think there's a case to be made, although there's no shame in losing to the Polish Pistola. But I think the guy that shows you that you're a little bit overrated is not Kiichi Kunimoto.
All right.
Moving on, Max Holloway in the semi-main event against Cole Miller. And Stevie, we'll start with you.
Oh, blessed Holloway all day.
And twice on Sunday.
And twice on Sunday, because he's blessed.
There you go. Yeah, I'm going to go with Holloway too. What about you, Todd?
I also favor Holloway. I think that I've always been a fan of Cole Miller. He's a fun fighter to watch. He's well-rounded. He's a fighter. He's a guy that looks to finish, whether it's standing or on the ground. He doesn't, give, he's not a guy that backs down from a fight, but Holloway's just, has so much more natural skill. He's got great movement, got great footwork, very fast, very dynamic striker. I think it's a tricky matchup for Cole Miller. Yeah,
I like Cole Miller as a fighter, but I think I just don't see him win this fight. I think Cole Miller is the up and down fighter on the, he's that type of fighter where he'll win 2, he'll lose 2, win 2, up 2. He's never constant win, constant lose.
Has anybody noticed that Cole Miller's picture on Wikipedia looks like a mugshot?
Oh no. Oh my god. Oh, that's just scary.
Yeah, that is not a flattering photo of him.
You should just put the caption, "This person killed 10 people on the subway, film at 11.
You'd believe it too, just looking at that picture. Oh my god.
I don't know. He's beat up enough though that I think it would be a little bit scary if he was beat up a little bit less, because then it would be like, uh-oh, what happened to the other guy? Whereas this one, it looks like he got into a street fight and he came out worse and he's kind of grumpy about it.
Yeah, this looks like it might have been taken after his fight with Steven Seiler or Matt Wyman.
Oh, I don't know. All right, well, let's go to the main event. And Todd, we'll start with you on this one, but I will ask a question first. Do you think that it's wise to have Benson Henderson fighting this quickly after his last fight?
Wise for him, wise for UFC.
Wise for him.
I don't tend to put as much stock in that as a lot of people do. I know that in general, and there isn't a lot, it hasn't happened that much, but the stats tend to suggest that it's less advantageous to fight so often, so so quick after another fight. But I don't know. I don't buy that as being a big factor. I think it's more just the styles of the individual fights. So I don't view it as being a big problem if you just had a fight to come back in there. If you did well in the last fight, you didn't take a beating, you're ready to go. So I don't view that as being a big factor, honestly.
And do you see him beating Brandon Thatch in this fight?
I do, actually. I was kind of surprised when I was originally thinking about this fight. I was thinking that in terms of like the odds, that Thatch might end up being a nice play because he's less known. He is in a bigger weight class. Benson Henderson's moving up. He is fighting on shorter notice. Thatch has been seeing the fight. So I thought there are a number of factors that might suggest that Thatch would do better than would be expected against Benson Henderson. But that didn't end up being the case at all as far as the odds. I was figuring Henderson would be a solid favorite, but he's not. It's basically a pick'em fight. And in a pick'em fight, I definitely favor Benson Henderson. He's been a guy that's been in there with much tougher competition. Thatch has dominated people, but he hasn't really fought anyone of note. He is bigger, but Henderson's very durable. He's a guy that has really good cardio. I think that if Thatch can't finish Henderson early, it's entirely possible that he's able to win a longer fight, but given that we haven't seen that, and we've seen Henderson pull out so many close fights over the years, I think sort of a longer back and forth fight favors Henderson, particularly with how crafty he is. So I do like Henderson in this fight. And I'm surprised that it's being viewed as sort of a pick'em fight. I think in spite of the size, I just think that Henderson is a higher, caliber of fighter. And I think perhaps what it is that there's sort of been since Thatch was put into that main event when, the other fights fell out, that there was sort of this sense that, like of a bunch of people talking about him, and people sort of talk themselves into being a bigger prospect than he was. He's a solid prospect, but I don't view him as having, established all that much versus a lot of sort of young undefeated guys that haven't been tested against stiff competition.
Stevie, your thoughts?
I think Todd pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think Thatch is definitely somebody you could tag a prospect and a guy for the future, but I don't think he's faced competition at the skill level of Benson Henderson. So even though I'm generally against fighters taking fights on 2 weeks notice, and I almost think that he's doing it to prove if Donald Cerrone can do it, so can I, but not everybody can be Donald Cerrone and keep winning fights, taking them as fast as he does. He's kind of the exception to the rule as far as I'm concerned. And since Benson lost that fight with Donald Cerrone, that gives me even more concern about him taking it on 2 weeks notice. But I will say that Brandon Thatch is probably going to meet his match.
The thing about Benson Henderson, and I'm wary about this, I wonder what his what his walk around weight is, because if he walks around at 170 or 175, this is going to be easier to make the weight, and you can focus that much more in training. But if he walks around at say 185, 190, and he cuts significantly to make his weight 155, which is probably not the case, but I think when you take into consideration what his walkout weight is, if this fight goes really well for him and he's able to dominate his opponent and, he feels really good after this fight, I think we might see him fight more at 170. Not saying he's tough enough to prove at 155, but maybe he's looking for another challenge perhaps, but Thatch isn't exactly a top tier 170 fighter, but he's in the conversation. Thatch could win this fight just as easily. You never know. You never take a fight easy on short notice like this. But I found his fight against Donald Cerrone was a little bit of a sparring contest almost. It wasn't really competitive as we've seen other Benson Henderson fights go. So I got Henderson winning this, but depending on how he wins will dictate if his next fight will be at 170 or 155.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you, Peter, because I think Benson Henderson still wants to prove he's one of the greatest lightweights in the world. I don't think he's willing to concede that title and move up a weight class. Even though he's not the champion, he still thinks in his mind he is championship caliber material. And since you're talking about his walking around weight, he's 5'9", so I can't imagine that he walks around very heavy. I would think he probably walks around naturally at like 175 at the most. And so for him, it's not a hard weight cut to make welterweight, but it's probably not extraordinarily difficult for him to make a lightweight cut. He's not like Donald Cerrone at 6 foot fighting at lightweight. I always, he's had some issues with it in the past. He's got it under control now, but Donald Cerrone was one of those guys you'd always think, man, how does he make lightweight?
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm wondering what his walkout weight is. I'm pretty sure it's around 170, 175, but on that frame, I could see what you're saying, Stevie. So I think we're all in agreement for Benson Henderson to win this fight on Saturday night?
Seems unanimous.
Brandon Thatch will be looking for an escape hatch.
Oh, I opened that door and you went right through it. I should have never done it.
No.
Hopefully he won't be a late scratch.
Like Slick Rick, I shouldn't have done it.
Alright, well, that's going to do it for the show this week. Well, for Stevie J and our guest Todd Martin, I'm Peter H., the Hardcore Canadian. Thanks for listening, everybody, and as I always say, never leave it to the judges. Good night, everybody.